Let's get the view now from the opinion pages of the newspapers today, and writing in The Guardian, Tony Blair, remember him, says that only Labour can beat the Tories. The only way Labour can beat the Tories is to fight them on Brexit. But William Hague, remember him, now Lord Hague, in the Daily Telegraph, says his old adversary is way off the mark. The Times urges caution to the Europe-wide euphoria at the emergence of Emmanuel Macron as the front-runner in the French presidential election, pointing out that he has no base in the National Assembly. The Daily Mail likens some Labour ideas, says some Labour ideas could be interpreted as loony policies of the Communist Party of Britain. And the Mirror homes in on Theresa May's absence from the election campaign yesterday, accusing her of chickening out. Just been talking about President Trump's daughter Ivanka, who bills herself as the US first daughter and advisor to the president. She's written a piece along with Jim Yong Kim, president of the World Bank, in the Financial Times, pushing for more economic empowerment of women. Of the cartoonist, Adams in the Telegraph suggests Emmanuel Macron could become a somewhat Napoleonic figure if he's elected as the next French president. Morland in the Times illustrates the wake-up call France has been given with Macron and Marine Le Pen making it through to the second round. Cock a double doo-doo, the verdict there. And make what you will of Steve Bell's rather elusive interpretation of the French election in The Guardian. Joining me to discuss all that are Michael Heaver. He's former advisor to Nigel Farage, now co-owner of the political website Westmonster, and Sonia Sodha, former senior political advisor to Ed Miliband, now chief leader writer at The Observer. Welcome to you both. I have to say, I really enjoyed this sort of return to the
early 2000s.
Early 2000s with Tony Blair and William Hague taking each other on. I mean, Tony Blair's essential point is that Labour shouldn't try and run away from the Brexit issue in this campaign because that is the context in which it's taking place. William Hague doesn't really disagree with him on that, does he? He just doesn't like what he's saying.
No, so it's interesting, isn't it? So Tony Blair's advice for Labour MPs, and let's face it, it's kind of easier for him to deliver it being in the position that he is now, i.e. not a Labour MP himself. But he says, look, Theresa May's made this all about Brexit. A vote for me is a vote for Britain's negotiating hand. It's in the national interest. And Blair is arguing, well, actually, Labour MPs have to fight her on that territory. They can't cede that ground because that's the ground on which the election's going to be fought. And they need to say, actually, it's in Britain's national interest to have accountability for Theresa May. So you've got to vote for opposition parties as well. Now, I think the problem with that is the polls are pretty clear when it comes to Theresa May versus Jeremy Corbyn. Voters overwhelmingly think Theresa May is better placed to run the country and deliver a good deal on Brexit. Now, I'm not, that's just what the polls say. So I don't know that it's going to work to try and, if voters are showing that they sort of trust Theresa May, is it going to work to say, well, she needs to be held to account for this? I think they're probably going to find her line quite convincing. And I think William Hague's sort of riposte, I mean, it is essentially just a very elegant form of the coalition of chaos line that we've seen from the Tories. So, he does take about 1,000 words to say it, and it's less kind of, sort of a fighting talk than the election posters. But, he's sort of saying, well, actually, if you vote for the opposition parties, you are going to be weakening Theresa May's hand. So he's taking the Tory line here. I
mean, Michael, I know you disagree with Tony Blair on this, but he has got a point that when Mrs May says she wants people to vote for her to strengthen the Prime Minister's hand, in fact, what she's saying is, vote for me and I'm going to deliver hard Brexit.
Well, look, I think for Brexiteers, to have someone like Tony Blair being out there saying we must stop this, and Mandelson as well, and all the rest of them, I think it's great, because I think these guys represent the past, and in many ways it makes people think, well, that's the past, Brexit's the future. The interesting part, I think, with William Hague from the Brexiteer side is he's saying, well, if we get a big Tory majority, that allows Theresa May to do more compromise with the EU. And I would argue that the best outcome for Brexiteers is a Brexit majority with a backbone of UKIP MPs to make sure that Theresa May doesn't submit too much, which I think we could see on things like fisheries. But the Labour position has been exposed once again as being a complete dog's dinner. You've just had Keir Starmer talk about potential reformed membership of the single market. Well, you cannot be in the single market at all without having freedom
we'll be asking him about that later on.
Okay, but then you've also got Chuka Ramuna talking about he's going to be campaigning to stay in the single market emphatically. So Blair is throwing some more thinking into the Labour pit on Brexit, but I don't understand what it is. I mean, it's completely all over the place.
Well, can you enlighten him?
Well, I'm afraid I think Michael's got a point. It's the fundamental point here is that Labour is split on Brexit. I think that's become kind of apparently clear. So I think Keir Starmer did the best job that he could in sort of trying to stitch a position together. The problem is that it's not always kind of internally consistent. So it's really tricky to say, we need managed migration, freedom of movement must come to an end, but we still want all the benefits of the single market.
Would Labour actually be better off if they took a leaf out of the Lib Dems book and says, listen, vote Labour to resist Brexit?
Well, I think that's sort of what Tony Blair is kind of advocating for. It places them in a very difficult position, though. They don't quite have the freedom of the Lib Dems because they do have quite a few MPs who vote, who represent areas that overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union. So I think those Labour MPs find themselves in quite a difficult position. Some of them support membership, or supported Remain themselves, and their constituents voted against it.
Now, what about those French elections, Michael? You were following them closely.
Yeah.
Suggestion in the Times, really, that they're not very sure about Macron as a conventional mainstream politician.
Yeah, I think the Times piece is really interesting. What it's basically saying is that Emmanuel Macron is someone who we know wants things like more Eurozone integration. We know that. But he's sort of not played his hand out. He's not made that argument to the French people. And, the same can be said for Le Pen. She said that she wants to leave the euro and potentially Frexit completely. But they both need to lay out their visions for France overall. The thing I find really interesting about Macron, and I think this is completely unprecedented, is the EU as an institution, everyone from Jean-Claude Juncker down, has formally come out and endorsed Macron. So you've got the EU, an unelected president, now endorsing and interfering directly in national elections. And I think this is the future of the EU. I think you'll see it in Hungary, in Poland, national governments and candidates that are standing that want to oppose further EU integration. The EU is going to try and oust them directly. Very dangerous.
I hardly think EU people expressing a view about the French election when you've got Macron standing against a nationalist, somebody who is very avowedly anti-EU, is interfering in an election. I think the French people are intelligent enough to look at the endorsements and make up their own minds. It's certainly not the sort of, Putin-style interference that has been alleged by some. But I think the Times leader is very sensible, actually, in sounding a warning note. We have seen a big sigh of relief after Sunday. It looks like Macron versus Le Pen, it looks like Macron will take it in 3 weeks' time. But the Times is right to sound a warning sign, just saying this isn't the defeat of nationalism in France, and it's definitely not the defeat of Euroscepticism in France either. A lot rides on the next 5 years when Macron is president, what he can deliver. He faces a tricky situation in the sense that, his party isn't going to control the National Assembly. There are elections coming up in June. And I think the sort of populism that we've seen in France, both left populism and right populism, isn't necessarily going to go away just with the election of Macron.
Well, we'll find out in 12 days' time, second round of the French presidential election. Thank you both very much indeed. Full coverage of that, of course, here on Sky News. Meanwhile, this is All Out Politics. Up next...